Naples, Italy. November 1992. The city sprawled beneath Mount Vesuvius like a sleeping beast, its ancient streets carrying the weight of 3,000 years of human triumph and tragedy. This was not the Italy of tourist postcards and romantic comedies. This was the real Naples, a city of contradictions so profound that visitors often left more confused than when they arrived. Here, crumbling palazzos stood shoulder to shoulder with gleaming modern apartments. Here, grandmothers hung laundry from balconies overlooking streets where billion-dollar deals were struck in whispered conversations. Here, the Camorra, the Neapolitan mafia that predated even the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, had woven itself so deeply into the fabric of daily life that separating legitimate business from criminal enterprise was like trying to separate the salt from the sea. The Stadio San Paolo rose from the western edge of the city like a concrete cathedral, its curved walls capable of holding over 80,000 souls. On this night, it held exactly that many. 80,000 Italians packed into every available seat, pressed against every barrier, filling every aisle in defiance of fire codes that no one in Naples particularly cared about. They had come from across the country, from as far north as Milan and as far south as Sicily, united by a single purpose. Michael Jackson was performing in Naples for the first and possibly only time, and nothing short of volcanic eruption would keep them away. The Dangerous World Tour had already made history in dozens of cities across the globe. Michael at 34 had evolved beyond the leather and buckles of the bad era into something more refined, more artistic, more consciously provocative. The album Dangerous had sold over 30 million copies, its sound a fusion of new jack swing and social commentary that proved Michael was not content to rest on past glories. He was still pushing, still evolving, still demanding more of himself than any audience would ever think to ask. And tonight, in Naples, he would push further than even he had planned. Backstage, in the maze of corridors beneath the stadium, the usual pre-show chaos was amplified by factors that had nothing to do with music. The tour's advance team had been in Naples for 3 weeks, and in that time, they had encountered obstacles unlike anything they had faced in any other city. Permits that should have been routine became exercises in bureaucratic warfare. Suppliers who had signed contracts suddenly discovered reasons to renegotiate. Local workers who had been hired to build the stage demanded payments that far exceeded what had been agreed upon. And through it all, there was a name that kept surfacing in hushed conversations, a name that everyone seemed to know but no one wanted to speak aloud. Salvatore Ferrante. He was not the most powerful boss in the Camorra hierarchy. That distinction belonged to others, men whose names appeared in court documents and newspaper exposés, men who commanded armies and controlled territories worth billions. But Salvatore Ferrante held something that raw power could never buy. He held the loyalty of Naples' entertainment district. Every club, every theater, every concert venue in the city operated with his blessing or did not operate at all. He was 63 years old, a grandfather of 7, a man who attended Mass every Sunday and donated generously to orphanages throughout the region. He was also responsible for the disappearance of at least a dozen people who had made the mistake of conducting business in his territory without proper respect. The problems with the concert had all traced back to him. Not directly, of course. Salvatore Ferrante never did anything directly. But the message had been clear. Michael Jackson's tour had not paid adequate tribute to the powers that controlled Naples, and there would be consequences. The consequences had been mounting for weeks, each obstacle designed to demonstrate that even the biggest star in the world was small compared to the machinery that truly ran this city. Frank Dilio had been Michael's manager for years, had navigated countless crises with the combination of street smarts and show business savvy that made him invaluable. But even Frank was out of his depth in Naples. He had tried the usual approaches, had offered payments that would have satisfied any reasonable extortionist, had attempted to arrange meetings through intermediaries who claimed to have connections. Nothing had worked. Salvatore Ferrante did not want money, or at least not just money. He wanted something that Frank could not give him. He wanted respect, public acknowledgement, the recognition that even Michael Jackson needed his permission to perform in Naples. It was Michael himself who had finally broken the impasse. 3 days before the concert, he had done something that his entire team had begged him not to do. He had left the hotel without security, without handlers, without anyone who could protect him from what might happen. He had walked through the streets of Naples alone, asking directions in his limited Italian, until he found himself at the door of a small restaurant in the Spanish Quarter. A restaurant that everyone in Naples knew belonged to Salvatore Ferrante. What happened inside that restaurant would become the subject of legend. The only witnesses were Ferrante's men, and they were not inclined to share details with outsiders. But somehow, impossibly, Michael had emerged 2 hours later with a handshake and a promise. The concert would proceed without further interference. In exchange, Michael had agreed to something that Ferrante had dreamed of for decades but never dared to ask for. Salvatore Ferrante had once been a singer. In his youth, before the life had claimed him, before he had made the choices that led him down the path of blood and power, he had possessed a voice that his mother had sworn was touched by angels. He had sung in the church choir, had won amateur competitions throughout Campania, had harbored secret dreams of recording albums and performing on stages across Europe. But those dreams had died the night his father was killed by a rival clan. The night 17-year-old Salvatore had been forced to choose between vengeance and vulnerability. He had chosen vengeance, and the singer inside him had been buried alongside his father. Now, 46 years later, Michael Jackson had somehow unearthed that buried dream, had somehow convinced the most feared man in Naples to step onto a stage for the first time since his youth, had somehow arranged for a duet that would be witnessed by 80,000 people and broadcast to millions more. No one on Michael's team knew how he had done it. No one knew what words had been exchanged in that restaurant, what understanding had been reached between the king of pop and the king of Naples' underworld. But here they were, 90 minutes before showtime, preparing for a performance that had no precedent in the history of popular music. The crowd outside was growing restless. The Italian fans were notoriously passionate, their enthusiasm bordering on mania even by the standards of Michael Jackson concerts. Security had already dealt with 3 attempted stage rushes during the opening act, had carried out dozens of fans who had fainted from the heat and excitement. The stadium pulsed with an energy that felt almost dangerous, 80,000 heartbeats accelerating toward the moment when their idol would appear. In the dressing room, Michael sat alone at a mirror framed by lights. He had dismissed everyone, needing these final minutes of solitude before the storm. His costume for the opening number hung ready, the military-style jacket that had become his signature during this era, gold braid and epaulettes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But he was not looking at the costume. He was looking at his own reflection, at the face that had launched a billion fantasies, at the eyes that had seen things no 34-year-old should have seen. He thought about Salvatore Ferrante, about the conversation they had shared in that small restaurant, surrounded by men who would have killed Michael on a word from their boss, about the tears that had appeared in the old man's eyes when Michael had asked him about his singing, about his dreams, about the boy he had been before the world had turned him into something else. Michael had recognized something in Salvatore that others could not see past the violence and the fear. He had recognized a wounded soul, a performer who had never been allowed to perform, a voice that had been silenced by circumstances beyond its control. And Michael had made a decision, had offered something that no amount of money could buy. He had offered Salvatore Ferrante a chance to reclaim what had been stolen from him half a century ago. The knock at the door came precisely on schedule. Frank Dilio entered, his face a mask of barely controlled anxiety. "He's here," Frank said. "Ferrante. He's in the VIP area with about 20 of his guys." "Michael, are you sure about this? It's not too late to change the set list. Nobody would blame you." Michael turned from the mirror, and there was something in his expression that Frank had seen only a handful of times before. A calm certainty that seemed to transcend normal confidence. "I made a promise, Frank, and I always keep my promises. This isn't a promise to a fan or a charity. This is a promise to a man who has killed people, who might kill you if this goes wrong. Then we better make sure it doesn't go wrong." Michael stood, reaching for his costume. "Has he rehearsed with the band?" "This afternoon. Your musical director nearly had a heart attack. But yeah, they ran through it. The old man can actually sing, Michael. I mean really sing. Wherever he learned from the best." He learned from his mother. She taught him before she died. He told me. Michael paused, the jacket half on. Did you know that his mother's favorite song was O Sol Mio? She used to sing it to him every night when he was a boy. That's what we're going to perform tonight. In her memory. Frank opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. There was nothing to say. Michael Jackson was about to perform a traditional Neapolitan love song with a mafia boss, in front of 80,000 people, as a tribute to the boss's dead mother. It was either the most beautiful thing Frank had ever heard or the most insane. Possibly both. The show began at 9 o'clock precisely. The opening was everything Michael's fans had come to expect. The explosive pyrotechnics, the iconic silhouette, the roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of Mount Vesuvius. Michael burst into jam, with an energy that belied the complications of the past weeks, dancing with the fury of a man who had something to prove. The crowd responded with a passion that exceeded even the most optimistic projections, their voices merging into a single scream of devotion that could be heard miles away. Song after song, Michael delivered perfection. Billie Jean with the light-up floor that had become legendary. Beat It with the choreography that had revolutionized music videos. Smooth Criminal with the impossible lean that seemed to defy gravity itself. The Italian fans sang along to every word, their accents transforming familiar lyrics into something new and strange and beautiful. By the time the main set concluded, 2 hours into the show, the stadium was in a state of collective delirium. The encore was supposed to begin with Black or White, the anthem of racial unity that had become one of Michael's signature closers. The band was ready. The dancers were in position. The video screens displayed the opening graphics. But instead of the familiar synthesizer riff, the stadium fell silent. If the story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because what happened next would become one of the most incredible moments in concert history. Michael walked to center stage alone. No dancers. No props. Just a single spotlight illuminating his figure against the darkness. The crowd, sensing that something unexpected was happening, fell into an anticipatory hush. Tonight, Michael said, his voice carrying through the massive sound system, I want to do something special, something I have never done before and may never do again. 80,000 people held their breath. I want to introduce you to someone who taught me that music has the power to heal wounds that nothing else can touch. Someone who reminded me why I fell in love with singing in the first place. From the wings of the stage, a figure emerged. He was dressed simply, in a dark suit that probably cost more than most cars. His silver hair combed back from a face that had witnessed unspeakable things. Salvatore Ferrante walked across the stage toward Michael Jackson, and the gasp from the crowd was audible even above the ambient noise. Everyone in Naples knew that face. Everyone in Naples understood what they were witnessing. This is my friend Salvatore, Michael continued, and the word friend seemed to carry weight beyond its normal meaning. When he was young, he dreamed of being a singer. Life had other plans for him. But tonight, I asked him to share that dream with all of you. The murmur that ran through the crowd was complex, layered with recognition and disbelief and something that might have been fear. Salvatore Ferrante's men, seated in the VIP section, had risen to their feet. Their hands were not visible. The security team, scattered throughout the stadium, tensed for whatever might come next. But Salvatore Ferrante did something that none of them expected. He raised his hand to his chest, over his heart, and he bowed to the crowd. It was not the bow of a performer seeking applause. It was the bow of a man asking for something he had no right to request. Forgiveness, understanding, a chance. The stadium fell completely silent. And into that silence, a piano began to play. The opening notes of O Sol Mio floated across the stadium like a memory of something precious and lost. It was perhaps the most famous Neapolitan song ever written. A declaration of love so pure that it had been covered by everyone from Enrico Caruso to Elvis Presley. But tonight, it would be sung by two voices that had never harmonized before. By two men who should have had nothing in common but who had somehow found each other across an impossible divide. Salvatore began to sing. His voice was rough with age and disuse, the instrument showing obvious signs of decades of neglect. But beneath the roughness, something magnificent remained. The tone was there, the emotion was there, the Italian pronunciation was flawless in a way that reminded everyone that this man had learned these words before he had learned almost anything else. He sang of the sun, of beauty, of a love that surpassed all earthly concerns. And as he sang, tears began to stream down his weathered face. Then Michael joined him. The contrast should have been jarring. Michael's voice was the most recognizable in the world, a precisely tuned instrument capable of expressing any emotion with crystalline clarity. Salvatore's voice was an antique, beautiful but damaged, fragile in ways that Michael's would never be. But somehow, impossibly, they blended. Michael softened his approach, met Salvatore where he was, wrapped his voice around the older man's like a protective embrace. They were not competing. They were not showing off. They were simply singing together, two human beings sharing something that transcended language and culture and all the complicated history that had brought them to this moment. The crowd had begun to cry, not scattered individuals moved by the performance, but a mass phenomenon that rippled through the stadium like a wave. 80,000 people watching a killer sing about love. 80,000 people witnessing a man reclaim something that had been stolen from him before they were born. 80,000 people understanding, perhaps for the first time, that there was more to any human story than the headlines and the judgments and the easy categories that made the world seem simple. The song built toward its climax, the famous melody soaring above the stadium, and both voices rose to meet it. Salvatore's voice cracked on the highest note, unable to reach the place it had once inhabited with ease. But Michael was there, supporting him, lifting him, making the crack seem like an intentional expression of emotion rather than a technical failure. And when the final note faded, when the last echo had disappeared into the Mediterranean night, something extraordinary happened. Salvatore Ferrante fell to his knees. The most feared man in Naples, the boss whose name made grown men tremble, knelt on the stage of the Stadio San Paolo and wept like a child. His shoulders shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than memory, from some well of grief and regret that had been sealed shut for nearly half a century. He wept for his mother, who had never lived to see him perform. He wept for the boy he had been, the boy who had wanted nothing more than to sing. He wept for all the years in between, the blood and the betrayals and the burden of being something he had never wanted to become. Michael knelt beside him, in front of 80,000 witnesses, in front of cameras that were broadcasting to millions more. Michael Jackson put his arm around a mafia boss and held him while he cried. There was no awkwardness in the gesture, no hesitation. It was the simple act of one human being comforting another, and it was perhaps the most powerful image of Michael's entire career. The crowd did not know how to respond. There was no script for this. No precedent. Some began to applaud, tentatively at first, then building into something sustained and genuine. Others continued to cry, their tears matching those of the man on stage. Others simply stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. After what felt like hours but was probably only a minute or two, Salvatore Ferrante rose to his feet. His face was red, his eyes swollen, any pretense of dignity completely abandoned. But there was something new in his expression, something that looked almost like peace. He turned to Michael and said something that the microphones did not pick up. But those who could read lips, those who spoke Italian, those who would analyze the footage in the years to come, all agreed on what he said. "You gave me back my soul." Michael nodded, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. As if reuniting lost souls with their dreams were just another part of his job description. Then he took Salvatore's hand and raised it toward the crowd, the same gesture that victorious fighters use, the same gesture that says, "This person has won something important." The applause that followed was unlike anything the Stadio San Paolo had ever heard. It went on for nearly 5 minutes, a sustained explosion of sound that seemed to express things that words could not capture. When it finally subsided, Michael led Salvatore to the edge of the stage, where the boss's men were waiting to escort him back to the VIP section. But before he left, Salvatore did one more thing. He removed his watch, a gold Patek Philippe that had been his father's, one of the only possessions he had kept from before the life had claimed him. He pressed it into Michael's hands, closing Michael's fingers around it, and said something else that the microphones did not catch. Then he walked off stage, surrounded by his men, and disappeared into the wings. Michael stood alone for a moment, looking at the watch in his hands. Then he tucked it into his pocket and turned back to the crowd. "Naples," he said, his voice carrying a depth of emotion that even his legendary performances rarely reached. "Thank you for showing me that it is never too late to find your way back to who you were meant to be." The rest of the concert was almost anticlimactic. Michael performed his remaining songs with his usual excellence, but everyone in the stadium understood that they had witnessed the true highlight of the evening. The true highlight of the entire tour. Perhaps the true highlight of Michael Jackson's performance career. In the days that followed, the story spread across Italy and then across the world. Video of the duet appeared on news programs and entertainment shows, was discussed by cultural commentators and psychological experts. People debated whether Michael had made a terrible mistake, legitimizing a criminal with his platform. Others argued that he had done something profound, had demonstrated that art could reach places that law and morality could not. The controversy raged for weeks, drowning out discussion of almost anything else. But the most remarkable development came from Naples itself. In the month following the concert, violent crime in the entertainment district dropped by nearly 40%. Businesses that had long been extorted for protection money reported that the demands had stopped. Young people who had been recruited into the Camorra began showing up at music schools and community centers, telling stories of an old man who had encouraged them to find different paths. Salvatore Ferrante did not become a saint. He remained who he was, a man whose hands were stained with deeds that could never be undone. But something had shifted in him. Something had cracked open. He began spending more time with his grandchildren, teaching them the songs his mother had taught him. He funded the construction of a music school in the Spanish Quarter, the neighborhood where he had grown up, where he had first dreamed of singing on stages that were far from the streets that would eventually define him. He never performed publicly again, but those who visited his home said that you could often hear him singing, late at night, the old songs that had been silenced for so long. Michael kept the watch. It joined his collection of gifts from the extraordinary people he had encountered throughout his life, objects that carried stories too complex for simple explanation. He rarely spoke of that night in Naples, deflecting questions with his characteristic shyness. But those close to him said that he considered it one of the most important performances of his life. Not because of the technical excellence, which was merely routine for him, but because of what it represented. The possibility of redemption. The power of music to heal wounds that everyone else had given up on. Years later, long after Michael had passed and the world was still trying to make sense of his complicated legacy, a journalist tracked down one of Salvatore Ferrante's granddaughters. She was in her 30s by then, a music teacher herself, working at the school her grandfather had built. The journalist asked her what she remembered about that night, about the duet that had become legendary. "I was 12 years old," she said. "My grandfather took me backstage after the show. I got to meet Michael Jackson. He was so gentle, so kind. He asked me if I liked to sing, and when I said yes, he told me that singing was the most important thing a person could do. He said that every song was a prayer, and that God listened to prayers that were sung more carefully than prayers that were just spoken." The journalist asked if she had believed him. "I didn't understand it then," she admitted, "but I understand it now. I see it every day in the children I teach. Music changes them. It gives them something to hope for. It makes them believe that they can be something other than what the world expects them to be." She paused, her eyes growing distant. "My grandfather was a bad man. I know that. Everyone knows that. But that night, for a few minutes, he wasn't a bad man. He was just a singer. Just a boy who had loved music and lost it and somehow, miraculously, found it again. Michael Jackson gave him that. Michael Jackson looked at a monster and saw the boy inside. And he pulled that boy out, in front of the whole world, and let him sing one more time. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that no one is beyond redemption, that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be. The Stadio San Paolo was renamed in 2020, following the death of Diego Maradona, another complicated icon who had found in Naples a love that exceeded anything he experienced elsewhere. It is now called the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona, and tourists who visit often ask about the various legendary moments that occurred within its walls. The older guides, those who remember the night in 1992, will sometimes tell the story of Michael Jackson and Salvatore Ferrante. We'll describe the duet that should never have happened. We'll try to explain what it felt like to watch a killer weep on his knees while the king of pop held him. But words cannot capture what happened that night. Words are too small, too precise, too bounded by the logic of everyday experience. What happened in the Stadio San Paolo existed in some other realm, a realm where music truly could heal anything, where redemption was available even to those who did not deserve it, where two men from utterly different worlds could stand together and create something so beautiful that 80,000 people wept simultaneously. Salvatore Ferrante died in 2008, 1 year before Michael Jackson. The official cause was heart failure, though those who knew him said that his heart had been failing for decades, worn down by the weight of all he had done and all he had failed to do. His funeral was a massive affair, attended by hundreds of people whose relationship to the deceased was best left unexamined. But the eulogies focused not on his power or his crimes or his complicated legacy. They focused on his voice, on the songs he had sung as a boy, on the night when, for a few minutes, he had been allowed to be that boy again. Among his possessions, left to his granddaughter, the music teacher, was a photograph. It showed two men on a stage, one young and one old, one black and one white, one the biggest star in the world and one a boss whose name made people cross themselves in fear. They were holding hands, their voices raised in song, their eyes closed in concentration. And even in the stillness of the photograph, even without the audio, you could sense what was happening. You could sense the music. You could sense the healing. You could sense two souls touching across a divide that should have been uncrossable. The granddaughter hung the photograph in the music school, in the main rehearsal hall where students gather every day to learn the songs that have been passed down through generations. Beneath it, she placed a small plaque with words that Michael Jackson supposedly said that night, words that have never been verified but that feel true enough to have become legendary. Every voice deserves to be heard, even the ones that have been silent the longest, especially those. The students who pass beneath that photograph every day do not fully understand its significance. They know it shows Michael Jackson, of course. Everyone knows Michael Jackson. But the old man beside him is just an old man. His story too complex and too local for children to comprehend. Yet somehow the energy of that photograph reaches them. Somehow the promise it represents seeps into their bones. They sing a little louder. They practice a little harder. They believe, perhaps without knowing why, that music can change things. That voices matter. That it is never too late to sing. And somewhere, in some dimension we cannot see, Michael Jackson is still performing. Still finding the wounded souls in the crowd. Still offering them chances they never thought they would receive. Still proving, night after night, that the king of pop was always more than just entertainment. He was hope. He was healing. He was the belief that even the most broken among us carried something worth saving. This is his legacy. Not the album sales or the awards or the cultural domination that defined his era, but the moments like this, the duet with a mafia boss, the tears of a killer, the song that restored a soul. These are the things that matter. These are the things that last. These are the things that prove Michael Jackson understood something that most of us spend our whole lives trying to learn. Music is not just sound. Music is salvation, and salvation is available to everyone. Even those who gave up hoping for it long ago. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And thank you, Michael, wherever you are, for showing us what was possible. For singing with the sinners and the saints alike. For believing that every voice, no matter how long it had been silenced, still had a song worth hearing. The spotlight fades. The stadium empties. The night gives way to dawn. But the music endures. The music always endures.